Okay, so I want to do another read here, looking at this sample from a prior year and make some comments to try to address some of the common issues that I see with some of the writing at the honors level. Political success of Hitler and Roosevelt was similar because they were brought into power through the promise of ending economic crisis. So I guess we're arguing that both leaders are similar. I'm going to put Hitler and Roosevelt, promise of ending the economic crisis. So that's what we have of their countries due to World War I by replacing the Weimar Republic. So now it's starting to get a little too complicated. This essay right here could just be enough that their promises of economic crisis, and then you cite some of those promises. If you wanted to take that route, maybe you give me a series of speeches. However, this individual has chosen to write more in the thesis, and now I'm expecting more. This seems to be, concerning. I don't quite get what this is. But let's see where they go. Replacing the Weimar Republic and the Republican Party, their nation's former government systems. Another essay could just be about this, about replacing the former government and the party. So that's another one. Their nation's former government. So now, since they say government systems, that's completely different because that necessarily isn't Republican Party or Weimar Republic. Politicians. It's really about changing your entire economic system. So for the most part, this thesis has some serious issues. They seem to have one, two, and three major issues that I would argue they cannot support in one paper. You need to start narrowing your stuff down. You have to start doing that. When we're looking at these questions and you're starting to use some vague general language, the political success of Hitler and Roosevelt was similar because they were brought into power with the promise of ending the economic crisis. I would ask right here, how? Be specific. Answer that question, how? How did they go about doing that? Were they giving speeches? What were their campaign posters like? Any of that stuff is going to matter. What did they say in debates? And that becomes your evidence for that point. For the most part, you can just scrap all of this. It's irrelevant. You're never going to be able to argue any of that stuff. It's just way too much. Start asking the questions: how and why. Narrow down what you are writing. I can't express that any more. It's just, it seems to be the biggest issue students have. Anyway, let's keep going here. In 1933, when it was time, economic strains of Germany, the U.S. Nazi Party leader Adolf Hitler and the Democratic Party presidential nominee Roosevelt were brought in as leaders of two hostile and economically deprived states. Okay, there's some historic context here. I understand why they're doing it. Could be somewhat problematic. As I put here, it seems to be a strong claim that we're two hostile and economically deprived states. I guess that's accurate, but both hostile? You just said that Roosevelt is hostile. I take offense to that as an American. Anyway, the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War, in which Germany lost, demanded Germany's pay. That on the other side of the Atlantic, the U.S. suffered from the Great Depression, where the New York Stock Exchange collapsed. Stock market crash wiped out 9 million bank savings accounts and nation's unemployment rates. I don't necessarily know what any of this has to do with some of these points. This seems to be a lot of writing here and not addressing any of these points. I'm not saying that it's not needed. I'm saying that this just seems to be too long. I'm reading this thinking, okay, give me the examples that you set out to address here. None of them have been addressed at this point. However, you do need to have some historic context. Maybe they could have just summed this up in two sentences. Tell me what the Americans are encountering, what the Germans are encountering, and that pretty much could be this section right here. So maybe they don't need this info in this section. It could kind of just get to this. But anyway, let's keep going. It's described, all right, so bank accounts say the nation unemployment rates up 20. The damage of the economic downfall to Germany is described by Arthur Willard Parsons. A hyperinflationary period combined with the effects of the Great Depression, increased social unrest, stabilizing the fragile Weimar Republic. Okay, so this source is talking about the inflation and its impact on the depression. What does that have to do with the promises? This source is not that. So you're wrong on that one. Okay, since they wrote more, now I have to, as the reader, try to make sense out of all of this. Do they have an argument for any of these other points? Ending the economic crisis of the country due to World War I by replacing the Weimar Republic and the Republican Party. This seems to be a possible reason as to why, but it still does not address the point that's being made here. So now, again, as the reader, I have to try to make sense out of this source. Their nation's former government systems is not even addressed in this point. So when I'm done reading this, I'm like, okay, well, I don't even know how that source links to that. There seems to be a huge disconnect with that particular item. If the student looked at that source and then asked those questions, how and why, how or why, depending on the situation, how does this source support what's here? They probably would come to the conclusion that it doesn't. Then I would ask, well, let's get rid of this because it's not needed. I need to see a direct connection between your source and this stuff. Otherwise, don't include it. Don't make me read. Don't make me try to piece this together. If I'm reading this and I have to try to make sense out of this, you are going to lose points for clarity. You are going to lose points on flow because I have to, as the reader, struggle to try to make sense out of your work. Anyway, hyperinflationary period combined with the effects of the Depression increased social unrest, destabilizing the fragile Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was on a hot seat after it failed to bring economic crisis. The German people were upset at the economic chaos and began to follow right-wing activists who worked to dispose the government. Similarly, in the U.S., the Republican Party came under fire for, say, trying to compare the two parties, the Nazi Party to the Democratic Party. I guess I see what they're doing. They're trying to go back and forth between those two. But all of this is so messed up that it really doesn't help here. Um, this source and this analysis don't match. It seems that they're trying to address items that are here with an invalid source. Um, I like the use here where they make this transition to the Republican Party. However, I don't have anything additional on this one to kind of see where they go with this. I think that's all that I have on that one. No, we got more. Okay, came under fire for its weak policy with Democrats blamed for causing the depression. Journalist Del Markey captures the role, the effect, and responsive party. The stock market crash causing many Americans to lose their savings and plunge the nation into recession. That was a party that could offer solutions to the American people who were most deeply affected by the onset of the Depression. So now they're talking about the party presenting itself. That's what's in that source. So now I have to go back here. I don't know that this source has anything to do about Roosevelt promising. There's no promise in that second source. There's no replacing the Weimar and the Republican Party or this. Like I would expect this source, if this source here was talking about, I don't know, the Republican Party issuing a statement, um, or the Democrats issuing a statement about replacing the Republican Party, then it would work. If that in that source they said we're going to replace the former government system, it would work. There's no link here. This seems to be a stretch. It's almost as if the student wants to write about these issues here, but doesn't want to include any source. So like, why even bother with a source? So when I'm looking at this, you're probably going to lose 4 points for this source. You're going to lose 4 points for that other source, and you're probably going to lose source points or points for having sources that not able to support your argument. So there seems to be a lot of issues with this one. Let's take a look at this source here. From 76 to 78, I like this. The student is getting very specific. 76 to 78. The New York Times prioritized Nixon, scandal, Exxon, and General Motors over the slaughter. All right, so this is straightforward. I expect the student to write about the New York Times and the New York Times only from 76 to 78. That is how you get a specific thesis. Let's see. The New York Times published more articles from 67 to 68 on topics like Nixon's Watergate scandal, Exxon Oil, and General Motors, our vehicle manufacturing company, than on the Cambodian genocide. When Cambodia, so they're giving us some brief intro here. Now they're talking about the genocide. The table below shows a number of articles. So, all right, the table below shows a number of articles written about the topics. So that seems to be a pretty good transition. They've given me some historic context. Now they're transitioning into their source. And their source seems to be how many articles were written about these various topics. How do I know that? Because they flat out said it here. And we see 76 to 78, and we see that being addressed right here. And here we see the results. So as I look at this, as horrific as this genocide was, and we know that, they're mentioning that here, we have all of these results in comparison to this, and this amount. Not bad. In 76, they wrote about 3 times the amount of articles about Nixon's Watergate scandal than the Cambodian dying in Southeastern Asia. The scandal has been publicized in 72, and yet over 600 articles were being written about it 4 years later. According to Cambodian forces, a new migration wave, hundreds of thousands are said to be moved. Again, with the death toll regime is again forcing hundreds of thousands. Cambodian population were forcibly evacuated from Phnom Penh, capital of Cambodia. During an enormous amount of Cambodians died from disease. Refugee, arduous amount of migration, describe how the troops held them at the gunpoint, walked on ice, and now they're giving me, I guess they have to say that this genocide was horrific. It was. Despite the horrors occurring in Cambodia, the New York Times wrote about a 4-year-old scandal. So here seems to be their point that they're trying to make here. And right there, I mean, we don't know where else this goes, but from the look of this, they flat out told me, hey, all I am writing about are these years and the New York Times, and my point is that they prioritize this over that. Now, I would possibly like to see an internal memo from the New York Times, but that doesn't seem to be the writer's point here. They seem to just want to make the point that, you know what, there were this amount of articles written, and these were the topics, and as horrific as this genocide was, the New York Times chose to write about these points as opposed to this, and you could take this in so many different directions. When I look at this, to answer the question how or why, I think the student addresses that. They're very specific about what they're writing about, specifically the New York Times and their role in reporting during the Cambodian genocide. That's it.